In contemporary American broadcast journalism, few figures embody the intersection of media, politics, and lifestyle branding as clearly as Ainsley Earhardt. The video presents her not merely as a television host, but as a fully realized symbol of professional success, personal resilience, and cultural influence. From the opening moments, the narrative frames Earhardt within a familiar yet powerful American trope: the self-made woman whose ambition, discipline, and adaptability have translated into both public prominence and private prosperity. At the core of this story is her rise within Fox News, a media institution that operates very differently from traditional news organizations. Fox News does not simply employ journalists. It cultivates personalities. Earhardt's early appearances on multiple programs allowed her to refine a communication style that balanced warmth, relatability, and ideological alignment with the network's conservative-leaning audience. This gradual exposure was less about investigative rigor and more about trust-building, familiarity, and emotional resonance with viewers. Her eventual promotion to co-host of Fox and Friends marked a decisive turning point. Morning television in the United States is a powerful agenda-setting space. It reaches audiences at the start of their day, shaping not only what issues matter, but how those issues are emotionally framed. Earhardt's presence on the show positioned her as a daily companion to millions of Americans, transforming her from a reporter into a household figure. This role carries immense soft power, and the video makes clear that her multimillion-dollar salary and growing net worth are direct reflections of that influence. What is particularly notable is how the video emphasizes a transition from professional credibility to personal brand. Earhardt's portrayed as someone whose value extends far beyond the studio. Her social media following, public appearances, and publishing ventures reinforce the idea that modern media success is no longer confined to airtime alone. Visibility across platforms becomes currency, and authenticity, carefully curated though it may be, becomes a commercial asset. The narrative also subtly underscores an important structural reality of American media culture. Success is often measured not just by journalistic achievement, but by lifestyle outcomes. Wealth, real estate, and visibility are treated as proof points of merit. In this framing, Earhardt's career is validated as much by her financial standing as by her professional longevity. The video does not question this equation. It embraces it, presenting prosperity as a natural reward for perseverance and alignment with the right institutional platform. As Ainsley Earhardt's career matured, the narrative surrounding her shifted from professional ascent to the broader implications of power, wealth, and visibility in American media culture. At this stage, the video no longer treats her primarily as a broadcaster, but as an individual who has successfully converted media exposure into lasting economic and social capital. This transition is critical to understanding her position within the contemporary conservative media ecosystem. A defining feature of Earhardt's public image is the way her personal life and financial standing are woven into her professional story. Her divorce from former husband Will Proctor and the highly publicized settlement that followed is presented not as a private setback, but as a moment of resilience and reassertion of independence. In American celebrity journalism, especially within politically charged media spaces, personal adversity often functions as narrative fuel. For Earhardt, the emphasis on financial security after divorce reinforces a broader message: stability, self-reliance, and strength in the face of disruption. These traits resonate strongly with an audience that values individual responsibility and perseverance. The extensive attention given to her real estate holdings further underscores how wealth operates as a form of legitimacy. Her Manhattan penthouse is described in meticulous detail, not simply to impress, but to situate her within a specific social class. Location, square footage, architectural features, and iconic views all function as signals. They communicate that Earhardt is no longer merely commenting on American life from the outside. She is firmly embedded within the elite urban landscape that often defines national influence. In this sense, property becomes more than an asset. It becomes a visual shorthand for success, authority, and arrival. The Florida estate connected to her relationship with Sean Hannity carries even deeper symbolic weight. Florida, particularly its exclusive coastal enclaves, has emerged as a cultural and political stronghold for conservative elites in recent years. The decision to invest in such a property reflects more than lifestyle preference. It represents alignment with a geographic and ideological shift away from traditional power centers like New York toward regions that embody political comfort, tax advantages, and cultural affirmation. This state is framed as a sanctuary, a controlled environment where professional pressure and public scrutiny can be temporarily set aside. Vehicles, though seemingly minor details, also play a role in reinforcing identity. The contrast between a high-performance Corvette and a rugged, off-road Jeep mirrors a dual image carefully maintained throughout Earhart's career. On one hand, there is polished speed and success. On the other, there is durability, practicality, and a connection to American ruggedness. These choices are not presented as extravagances, but as reflections of character, subtly reinforcing the idea that her success has not detached her from traditional values. What emerges most clearly in this part of the story is the economic logic of modern media fame. Earhart's salary, real estate, and overall net worth are not portrayed as excessive or controversial. Instead, they are normalized as appropriate compensation for influence. In a media environment where trust and familiarity drive ratings, personalities like Earhart function as long-term investments for networks. Their faces anchor programs, stabilize audiences, and maintain ideological continuity. Financial reward in this context is framed as both deserved and necessary. Equally important is the role of audience perception. By showcasing her lifestyle, the video implicitly invites viewers to see her success as aspirational rather than alienating. The message is clear. Prosperity does not contradict moral or cultural values. It confirms them. This framing is especially effective within conservative media narratives, where wealth is often justified as the outcome of hard work, faith, and personal discipline rather than structural advantage. By the time Ainsley Earhardt had secured her place among the most recognizable faces on American morning television, her role had expanded far beyond that of a traditional news presenter. In this phase of her public life, influence itself became both her greatest asset and her greatest vulnerability. Part 3 of the narrative reveals how visibility, faith, philanthropy, and controversy intertwine, exposing the structural tensions that define modern political media in the United States. As a leading figure at Fox News, Earhart operates within an environment where commentary often blurs into advocacy. The video acknowledges this implicitly through its treatment of her on-air controversies. Statements regarding immigration, historical events, and public health during the COVID-19 pandemic are not framed merely as factual errors, but as moments that reveal the limits of personality-driven journalism. In a system that prioritizes speed, emotional clarity, and ideological alignment, nuance is often sacrificed. Earhart's misstatements, widely criticized by journalists and historians, illustrate how easily influence can outpace accuracy. Yet what is most striking is not that these controversies occurred, but that they failed to significantly damage her standing. This reflects a deeper reality of partisan media ecosystems. Viewers do not primarily seek correction or complexity. They seek affirmation, familiarity, and moral clarity. In this context, controversy can function less as a liability and more as proof of relevance. Being criticized by opposing media outlets may even strengthen loyalty among core audiences. Earhart's continued prominence demonstrates how accountability in such environments is selective and largely audience-driven. Faith plays a central role in stabilizing her public image amid these tensions. The video emphasizes her Christian identity not as a private belief, but as a defining element of her public persona. Faith becomes a moral anchor, a framework through which her actions, opinions, and philanthropic choices are interpreted. This is particularly evident in her association with organizations such as Samaritan's Purse, which blends religious mission with global disaster relief. By highlighting this connection, the narrative reinforces the idea that Earhart's worldview is grounded in compassion and service, even when her political commentary proves divisive. Her philanthropic involvement extends beyond religious organizations. As an ambassador for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, she aligns herself with military families and caregivers, a group that holds deep symbolic value in American conservative culture. This commitment is presented as personal and authentic, rooted in her family background and respect for service. Similarly, her support for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital emphasizes universal values that transcend politics. care for children, medical innovation, and compassion for families in crisis. These affiliations function as reputational counterweights, softening the impact of political controversies by situating her within broadly respected humanitarian causes. The inclusion of folds of honor further reinforces this pattern. Scholarships for families of fallen or disabled service members connect education, patriotism, and sacrifice into a single moral narrative. Through these causes, Earhart's public identity is framed not only around what she says on television, but around what she supports off camera. Philanthropy becomes an extension of influence, a way to translate visibility into moral legitimacy. The video also addresses cultural missteps, such as her comments linking a Christmas tree to multiple religious traditions. While widely criticized, this incident highlights an important aspect of her role. She speaks to a broad audience using symbolic language rather than precise theological or historical framing. These moments reveal the inherent risk of performing cultural unity in a fragmented society. In attempting to include everyone, she exposed gaps in understanding that critics were quick to exploit. Still, the backlash remained largely confined to social media cycles, again underscoring how insulated high-profile media figures can be from lasting consequences. Another critical dimension explored in this section is gender. As a woman operating in a highly politicized media environment, Earhardt is subjected to scrutiny that often extends beyond her professional performance. Her appearance, tone, relationships, and motherhood are all treated as relevant public data. The video subtly reflects this by devoting significant attention to her family life, her role as a mother, and her romantic relationships. These elements are not incidental. They are central to how female media figures are evaluated, particularly within conservative audiences that place strong emphasis on family values. Despite the scrutiny, Earhardt's longevity suggests a high degree of adaptability. She has learned how to navigate cycles of praise and criticism without retreating from the spotlight. Her strategy appears less about rebuttal and more about continuity, remaining visible, consistent, and emotionally accessible. In doing so, she reinforces a key principle of modern media power. Presence matters more than perfection. As the narrative moves deeper into Ainsley Earhardt's life, Part 4 focuses on an element that is often underestimated in media analysis, but is central to her enduring relevance: relationships. Not only romantic relationships, but relational power more broadly, how personal connections, family structures, and emotional narratives are transformed into extensions of media authority. In the contemporary American media landscape, influence is no longer exercised solely through words on screen. It is reinforced through carefully visible personal bonds that signal trust, stability, and alignment with shared values. Earhardt's relationship with Sean Hannity represents a particularly revealing case. Hannity is not simply another media personality. He is one of the most powerful figures in conservative broadcasting, with long-standing ties to political leadership and grassroots audiences alike. The video frames their engagement not as celebrity gossip, but as a convergence of two established pillars within the same ideological ecosystem. Their relationship functions symbolically as much as emotionally, reinforcing the sense of cohesion within conservative media culture. What matters here is not the romance itself, but what it communicates. To viewers, the pairing suggests continuity and internal unity. Two trusted voices, long familiar to audiences, forming a private bond that mirrors their public alignment. In an era where media credibility is increasingly fragmented, such relationships operate as stabilizing signals. They reassure audiences that the figures they trust share not only opinions, but values, lifestyles, and moral frameworks. The decision to maintain separate residences while sharing a jointly owned estate in Florida further reinforces this symbolism. Independence and togetherness are carefully balanced. Earhardt remains anchored in New York for professional reasons, while Hannity represents the broader migration of conservative elites toward Florida. This arrangement reflects a broader cultural shift. Power is no longer centralized in a single geographic hub. Instead, it is distributed across networks of influence, with media figures operating as mobile nodes rather than fixed institutions. Motherhood is another critical dimension explored in this phase of her story. The video repeatedly emphasizes Earhardt's identity as a mother, not merely as a personal detail, but as a defining moral credential. In conservative media narratives, motherhood often functions as proof of authenticity and grounding. It signals sacrifice, responsibility, and emotional depth. Earhart's careful balance between a demanding career and raising her daughter is presented as evidence of discipline rather than conflict, reinforcing an idealized image of modern womanhood that resonates strongly with her audience. Importantly, the portrayal avoids overt sentimentality. Instead, it integrates motherhood into a broader narrative of resilience. Personal hardship, miscarriage, divorce, public scrutiny is framed as formative rather than destabilizing. This approach transforms vulnerability into strength, a recurring pattern in the construction of media authority. By acknowledging struggle without appearing weakened by it, Earhart's image gains credibility. She becomes relatable without becoming fragile, a delicate balance that many public figures fail to maintain. Engagement announcements, real estate purchases, and lifestyle choices are selectively revealed, allowing audiences to feel informed without granting full access. This controlled transparency is a hallmark of successful media figures. It creates intimacy without surrendering privacy, a necessary strategy in an environment where constant exposure can quickly erode authority. Gender remains an undercurrent throughout this discussion. Earhart's relationships are scrutinized in ways that differ markedly from those of her male counterparts. Romantic choices, timing, and emotional expression are treated as indicators of character. The video reflects this reality by devoting significant attention to her marriages and engagement, implicitly acknowledging that a woman's personal life remains inseparable from her public evaluation. Yet rather than resisting this dynamic, Earhart appears to navigate strategically, allowing certain narratives to surface while keeping others deliberately opaque. The result is a highly personalized form of media power. Unlike traditional journalistic authority, which relies on distance and objectivity, Earhart's influence is built on familiarity and perceived moral alignment. Audiences do not merely watch her, they feel they know her. Relationships, in this sense, become part of the broadcast, even when they're not discussed directly on air. This personalization, however, carries long-term implications. When authority is rooted in personal narrative rather than institutional role, it becomes more resilient in some ways and more fragile in others. Loyal audiences may forgive mistakes, controversies, or factual errors because their trust is emotional rather than procedural. At the same time, shifts in personal circumstances, divorce, conflict, or perceived inconsistency can rapidly reshape public perception. The stakes of private life are therefore significantly higher for figures like Earhart than for traditional journalists. By the fifth stage of this narrative, Ainsley Earhardt's story moves beyond biography and controversy into a broader question that defines many contemporary media figures. What kind of legacy is being built, and how durable is it in a rapidly changing media environment? At this point, Earhardt is no longer simply advancing within a system. She has become a visible component of that system, shaped by it and, in turn, helping to shape its future direction. One of the most striking aspects of her career is timing. Earhardt rose during a period when American broadcast journalism was undergoing a profound transformation. Traditional norms of objectivity, separation between news and opinion, and institutional distance from audiences were giving way to a more personalized, emotionally driven model. Networks increasingly rewarded familiarity over formality and ideological clarity over ambiguity. Within this context, Earhart's skill set proved particularly valuable. She did not need to reinvent herself to survive this shift. She was, in many ways, a natural product of it. Her role on Fox and Friends exemplifies this transformation. The program functions less as a conventional news broadcast and more as a cultural touchstone for a specific audience. Its purpose is not only to inform, but to affirm identity, values, and emotional orientation toward current events. Earhart's presence contributes to this atmosphere of reassurance and continuity. Viewers tune in not simply to learn what happened, but to feel anchored in a familiar moral framework as they begin their day. From a legacy perspective, this raises an important distinction. Earhart's influence is not primarily measured in investigative breakthroughs or journalistic awards. Instead, it is measured in longevity, trust, and routine. She is part of the daily rhythm of millions of lives. This kind of influence is subtle but powerful. It does not announce itself as authority. It embeds itself as companionship. Over time, such presence can shape perceptions, normalize viewpoints, and reinforce cultural narratives with remarkable persistence. The question, however, is whether this form of influence can endure beyond the platform that sustains it. Cable news audiences are aging, and younger viewers increasingly consume information through fragmented digital channels. While Earhart has established a social media presence, the core of her authority remains tied to a traditional broadcast format. The video implicitly acknowledges this tension by emphasizing her adaptability and multi-platform visibility, yet it does not fully address the generational challenge facing figures rooted in cable television. Another dimension of legacy lies in authorship and education. Earhart's children's books and emphasis on literacy suggest an attempt to extend her influence beyond political media into moral and educational domains. This move is significant. Writing for children allows her to engage values such as kindness, empathy, and understanding without the polarizing framework of partisan commentary. It also positions her as a cultural guide rather than merely a commentator, reinforcing an image of responsibility toward future generations. Philanthropy further contributes to this long-term framing. By aligning herself with causes related to children, military families, and humanitarian relief, Earhart constructs a narrative of service that transcends daily news cycles. These commitments suggest an awareness that reputations anchored solely in commentary are inherently volatile. Charitable engagement offers a form of moral continuity, a way to be remembered not just for what was said on air, but for what was supported beyond it. At the same time, the video makes clear that Earhart's legacy will remain inseparable from controversy. Her misstatements, cultural gaffes, and polarizing commentary are part of the historical record. In a more traditional journalistic framework, such errors might have overshadowed other accomplishments. In the contemporary media environment, they coexist with success rather than negate it. This coexistence reflects a shift in how credibility is constructed. Accuracy remains important, but it competes with relatability, emotional clarity, and perceived authenticity. This dynamic raises broader questions about the future of media authority. Figures like Earhart thrive in environments where audiences prioritize alignment over arbitration. As long as trust is rooted in shared values rather than shared facts, her model of influence remains viable. The risk, however, is that such authority is highly contextual. It depends on stable audience identities and institutional backing. Should either erode, the foundations of influence may weaken more quickly than they were built. Yet it would be a mistake to underestimate the resilience of this model. Earhart's career demonstrates a keen understanding of continuity. She rarely positions herself as revolutionary or disruptive. Instead, she emphasizes tradition, faith, family, and emotional steadiness. These themes provide a sense of permanence in a media landscape defined by constant upheaval. In this way, her influence may outlast specific platforms precisely because it is rooted in timeless narratives rather than technological novelty. By this stage, Ainsley Earhart's public life can no longer be evaluated solely through career milestones or personal narrative. Part 6 shifts the focus outward, toward her cultural impact and the nature of the audience relationship that sustains her influence. What emerges is a clearer picture of how modern media power functions, not as universal authority, but as deeply segmented, emotionally reinforced loyalty. Earhart's strongest asset has always been her bond with a specific audience. Viewers of Fox News, particularly those who begin their mornings with Fox and Friends, do not approach the program as neutral observers. They approach it as a trusted space. Within that space, Earhart operates less like a distant journalist and more like a familiar presence whose tone, values, and reactions feel predictable and reassuring. This predictability is not a weakness. In fact, it is the foundation of her appeal. Audience loyalty in this context is built on emotional consistency rather than informational novelty. Earhart rarely seeks to surprise viewers with radical perspectives or complex reframing of issues. Instead, she reinforces a shared worldview through repetition, tone, and moral framing. Over time, this creates a sense of community. Viewers feel seen, validated, and emotionally aligned. That alignment explains why controversies that might damage credibility elsewhere often fail to meaningfully erode her standing among her core audience. However, This same dynamic also defines the limits of her influence. Earhart's reach is powerful but not expansive. Outside the conservative media ecosystem, she is often perceived very differently, sometimes as a partisan commentator rather than a journalist, sometimes as a cultural symbol of media polarization. This duality highlights a central feature of contemporary media. Influence is no longer measured by breadth, but by depth. Earhart's authority does not rely on persuading skeptics. It relies on maintaining resonance with those who already trust her. The video implicitly acknowledges this by emphasizing audience engagement rather than cross-ideological respect. Social media followers, book readers, and loyal viewers are presented as evidence of success. Absent is any claim that she bridges divides or reshapes broader national consensus. Instead, her role is framed as stabilizing and reinforcing an existing audience identity. In a fragmented media environment, this may be the most realistic form of power available. Cultural impact, in this sense, is cumulative rather than transformative. Earhardt does not redefine political discourse overnight. She contributes to a steady normalization of certain narratives, values, and emotional responses. Over years of consistent presence, these contributions shape how audiences interpret events, assign blame, and understand national identity. The effect is subtle but persistent, operating through habit rather than persuasion. Loyalty-driven influence is inherently conditional. It depends on continued alignment with audience expectations and institutional backing. Any perceived deviation, whether ideological, personal, or moral, can quickly disrupt trust. Unlike traditional institutional authority, which is buffered by formal roles and professional norms, personalized media power is more exposed. It must be continually maintained through performance, tone, and symbolic consistency. There is also the question of cultural longevity. As media consumption habits evolve, figures like Earhardt face structural challenges. Younger audiences are less attached to cable news personalities and more skeptical of singular authoritative voices. While her values-based messaging may resonate across generations in theory, the mediums through which that messaging is delivered are changing rapidly. Part 6 suggests that adaptability will be critical, but also implies that some forms of influence are inherently tied to specific eras and formats. Ultimately, this section clarifies that Ainsley Earhardt's power is neither absolute nor fragile. It is durable within its context and limited beyond it. She represents a successful adaptation to a media landscape defined by division, where trust is localized and authority is relational. Her cultural impact lies not in universal recognition, but in sustained relevance within a clearly defined audience sphere. In the final assessment, Ainsley Earhardt's public life stands less as an isolated success story and more as a reflection of the media era that produced her. Her career, personal narrative, and cultural presence collectively illustrate how American broadcast journalism has evolved from an institutional practice into a personality-centered system of influence. Part 7 draws these threads together, not to offer a definitive judgment, but to frame the broader implications of her trajectory. Earhardt's significance lies not only in what she has achieved, but in how those achievements were made possible. She rose at a time when trust in traditional institutions was declining, and audiences increasingly sought emotional familiarity over formal authority. Within this environment, her style, warm, accessible, values-oriented, proved highly effective. She became a figure audiences did not simply watch, but welcomed into their daily routines. This intimacy is a cornerstone of her influence and the reason her presence has endured despite controversy. At the same time, her story reveals the trade-offs inherent in this model. Influence built on emotional alignment is powerful, but it is also bounded. It does not aspire to universal credibility, nor does it require consensus. Instead, it thrives within clearly defined audience communities. Earhardt's authority is therefore contextual rather than absolute, shaped by shared identity and sustained by loyalty rather than by institutional neutrality. Her personal life, relationships, faith, and philanthropy further demonstrate how modern media figures are evaluated holistically. Professional performance cannot be separated from private narrative. Every aspect of life becomes part of the public ledger, interpreted as evidence of character and consistency. In navigating this terrain, Earhart has shown a capacity to transform vulnerability into resilience and scrutiny into continuity. These traits have allowed her to remain visible without appearing destabilized by the pressures of public life. From a historical perspective, her career may be remembered less for specific statements or broadcasts and more for what it represents. She embodies a shift in media power away from detached expertise and toward relational authority. In this sense, her legacy is intertwined with the rise of segmented media ecosystems, where influence is measured by depth of connection rather than breadth of appeal. The open question is how such legacies will age. As media platforms evolve and audience expectations change, figures rooted in cable television face an uncertain future. Yet the underlying dynamics that sustained Earhart's influence, identity, trust, emotional resonance, are unlikely to disappear. They may simply migrate to new formats and new voices. Ultimately, Ainsley Earhardt serves as a case study in the modern American media condition. Her story highlights both the possibilities and the limitations of personality-driven influence. It invites reflection on what society now values in its public figures, and on how power is exercised in an age where connection often matters more than consensus. In that sense, her career does not provide easy answers, but it offers a clear lens through which to understand the media landscape of her time.